Aziraphale, it's me. We need to talk.
Yes, I rather think we do.
I assume this is about
Armageddon. Yes.
Good Omens is the best book adaptation ever put to film. And I really mean that. It is honestly the best adaptation for a book I have ever seen. So if you're a fan of the show like me, and later on in the video you hear me say something you don't like or maybe disagree with, just remember the first thing I said in this video was that Good Omens is the best book adaptation ever. And I'm not alone in thinking this either. Good Omens is a massive hit amongst the fantasy book community, and it's only grown over the 30+ years since it was published. But what makes Good Omens so special? How has it maintained such a loyal fan base over the years? As one of the first videos for my channel, I wanted to talk about not only a show I deeply care about, but also the story about how that show was created and the impact it's had on fantasy culture as a whole. So without further ado, here's my opinion on Terry Pratchett's and Neil Gaiman's Good Omens. Co-written in 1985 by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, Good Omens is a modern fantasy novel that follows the story of an angel named Aziraphale,
Thank you.
and a demon named Crowley, who, having become accustomed to the sweet life on Earth, ends up working together to stop the 10-year-old antichrist Adam Young from bringing about the end of the world. Shenanigans ensued.
Some initial reports claim that the land that's risen in the Atlantic is the sunken continent of Atlantis.
Jokes are made.
Pornography.
Adventure is had by all. The two authors met when Gaiman, a struggling freelance journalist and book reviewer, was sent to do an interview with Pratchett, who'd just seen the release of his first Discworld book, The Color of Magic. The two hit it off, discovering that, while different in style, the two writers had a similar knack for writing the absurd. For those of you who aren't familiar with either of their work, this is similar to J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who were friends in real life, meeting almost by accident over a Starbucks. At this point in time, neither Pratchett nor Gaiman were the international sensations they are today. They were just two yet-to-be-proven writers enjoying some Chinese food. During the interview, Gaiman mentions that he's working on a satirical novel called William the Antichrist, a spoof of the Just William series by Richmal Crompton. A few months after the interview, Neil Gaiman has been hired by DC Comics imprint Vertigo to write what would be his genre-breaking graphic novel series, Sandman. At the same time, Pratchett calls Gaiman and asks if he was doing anything with that William the Antichrist book, and offers to either buy the book off of Gaiman or to co-write it with him. To which Gaiman replied, "It's like Michelangelo asking if you want to paint a ceiling together." And he took the job. Over the next few months, the two write Good Omens, with Pratchett taking about 2/3 of the workload, writing Adam and his group of friends called the Them, and Gaiman writing the more tangential storylines like Newt and Anathema, and the four horse persons of the apocalypse. The book then goes to auction, which, in case you're not familiar with the publishing term, it's essentially two or more publishers fighting over a book and can only use sacks of money as their main weapons. The book gains an almost ironical cult-like following and launches both Pratchett and Gaiman's careers. With such a beloved book selling out imprint after imprint, it was only a matter of time before Hollywood starts calling to make a film adaptation. The only problem was that both Gaiman and Pratchett agreed to never sell the movie rights unless they both agreed upon the terms the studio were offering. Terry Pratchett being particularly weary of adaptations of his work. I mean, just look at the terrible job The Watch turned out to be. So, with this stipulation between the two of them, it looked like Good Omens wasn't ever going to get the adaptation it deserved. Then
Mr. Pratchett, who created the Discworld novels, was diagnosed with the disease in December.
But a year ago, at the age of 59, I was told I had Alzheimer's.
In December of 2007, Terry Pratchett was diagnosed with posterior cortical atrophy, a form of early onset Alzheimer's. Faced with this life-altering and ultimately terminal diagnosis, Pratchett produced a few documentaries with the BBC explaining what it was like living with PCA, and even became an advocate for people living with painful terminal illnesses wanting to end their own life, a subject that society as a whole had never really considered. He went on to write 8 more Discworld novels after his diagnosis, each of them becoming a bestseller, but after a few years, Pratchett could sense that the end of his life was approaching, and asked Neil Gaiman if he could make Good Omens into a TV show before he passed. Initially, Gaiman hesitated on doing this as he's, one, not a showrunner, and two, he would have to take about 3 to 4 years off from writing his own books to do so. However, when Terry Pratchett did eventually pass in 2015, Gaiman saw the request as a way of making a farewell love letter to a lifelong friend, and decided to become Good Omens showrunner, with the series produced by Amazon Prime Video and the BBC. So now that we've gone over the backstory, let's talk about the series itself.
I can't cope with this while I'm drunk. I'm going to sober up.
Yeah, me too.
There are so many extraordinary things about this series, it's going to be hard to put it all into one video, but trust me when I say it really is just that. Extraordinary. Film adaptations for a book, even in a long-form medium like television, tend to fall into one of two categories. Either they have to cut out everything from chunks of time, plots, sometimes even entire characters, in order to keep the runtime down, or they have to add a bunch of stuff that wasn't there before to stretch out the runtime and match the narrative beats of, say, a 10-episode season. Good Omens falls into the latter category, but none of the things that are added to the show are to its detriment. The character of Gabriel, played by John Hamm, who only gets a small mention in the book, is now a major character, acting as a stand-in for micromanagers everywhere.
Who exactly summons them?
Not my department.
Another example of a perfect addition to the show that wasn't in the book is the entire first half of episode 3. Where we see the 6,000 years of Crowley and Aziraphale bumping into each other.
Crowley. Oh, good lord.
In fact, David Tennant and Michael Sheen's Aziraphale and Crowley are easily the best things in the show. They have the best jokes.
Well, we are here to lick some serious butt.
Kick, Aziraphale's kick butt, for heaven's sake. Oh, I would have just said that.
The best fights.
You're so clever! How can somebody as clever as you be so stupid?
I forgive you.
In fact, Tennant and Sheen have both said they went into their respective roles as if the characters were an old married couple. One of the key factors that goes into making a good adaptation is to use the strengths of the medium you're adapting to. Comic books have the strength of portraying emotion and action through still images. Good Omens uses the strength of a long-form TV series to show Crowley and Aziraphale's history. Something that the fans of Good Omens could only speculate through little tidbits given throughout the book.
Well, let's have lunch.
I still owe you one from
Paris, 1793.
Yes, the Reign of Terror.
This is a 30-minute sequence before the show's opening theme, and this entire sequence doesn't move the main story along in any way, shape, or form, but we as an audience don't actually care because of how engaged we are with these characters. Imagine if Tolkien had stopped halfway through writing The Two Towers to give Legolas and Gimli's entire backstory leading up to the Battle of Helm's Deep. I mean, he'd probably love that because excessive world building was kind of his jam, but narrative-wise, it wouldn't work. But here, it does. Not to mention there's just cute little nods in the show to both of the writer's other works, like there are Discworld novels in Aziraphale's bookstore, along with Pratchett's trademark hat. And the guard on the Air Force Base is reading American Gods. As author, creator, writer, and showrunner, Neil Gaiman not only has intimate knowledge of the source material, but can actively improve upon it with little to no pushback from the studio, and the results are an amazing series. That being said, I do want to talk about some of the things that I didn't like.
Get thee behind me, foul fiend.
I know, but stick with me, and I'll do my best to explain.
After you.
The casting in this series is either perfect or a bit of a whiff. Not bad by any means, but kind of off? Tennant and Sheen play their respective roles as if they were tailor-made for them, and Miranda Richardson knocks it out of the park as Madame Tracy. Jack Whitehall does a pretty decent Newton Pulsifer. So does everyone in the Witchfinder Army storyline, really. And 3 out of the 4 horsepersons are really fun to watch. I really only have 3 main complaints when it comes to casting. The first is Adam. Now, I'm not really going to hark on a child actor for not acting as well as the professional adults surrounding him. Not only is that a real Phantom Menace kind of a move, but it's also not fair to this kid who is in fact a kid. Plus, he's doing a way better job than whatever the hell this kid is doing.
That was the best 11th
best birthday ever!
And it's not like he starts off bad either. In the beginning of the series, he plays the role pretty great, actually. See, in the book, Adam is this kind of wooden, emotionless kid who's in charge of his little gang of friends. He doesn't realize it yet, but he's got reality-bending powers, and things around him just kind of work out in the way he expects them to, so he's never surprised. It's only later on in the show do we see the limits of his abilities.
Adam, after we get our bikes, where are we going?
The end of the world. It's not far.
Good job, kid. You tried. The next character I want to talk about is God. No, not like that. Don't get me wrong, Frances McDormand is a wonderful actor and deserves all the praise she gets in all of her other roles, but in Good Omens, well, she comes off as little more than a barely heard from and never seen authority figure that may or may not have things figured out. And I know that's kind of the point, but it also comes off annoying. Take this scene, for instance.
Aziraphale, Angel of the Eastern Gate.
Yes, Lord?
Where is the flaming sword I gave you, Aziraphale? To guard the Gate of Eden.
Sword?
The entire scene feels like McDormand is an assistant manager who's just lost the key to the register. I know fan casting for these things is ultimately useless, if not downright insulting to the actual cast, but I can't help but think that a Julie Louis-Dreyfus or a Whoopi Goldberg could have been a better choice. But as lackluster as McDormand's performance can be in places, there's still one performance that's an even bigger letdown. Death in Terry Pratchett's Discworld is by far the most beloved character in the series. There's a reason Death is the only character that shows up in literally every book, and it's because Pratchett uses him as a means of reflecting human nature, and more importantly, the intricacies of human life, back at us, the audience. Death has a daughter, and then a granddaughter whom he cares for.
Tell me, am I a good grandfather?
If I tell you, won't that be a paradox?
Not for us.
But has to struggle with the fact that he knows eventually he'll have to come for them like he does everyone.
Yes, I could have done something.
He tries and fails to crack jokes to the recently dead as a way of making the process of dying more enjoyable. Despite being made up of nothing but bones, Terry Pratchett's death has got quite a lot of heart. Before his passing, Pratchett used to receive letters from terminally ill patients in hospice saying they were no longer afraid of dying because Pratchett's portrayal of death was not only kind but comforting. The character is so beloved by his fans that when Pratchett died, thousands of them signed a petition to Death himself to give Terry back, something that I can't help but think he would find incredibly funny. After his passing, Pratchett's assistant Rob Wilkins sent out a series of tweets saying, "At last, Sir Terry, we must walk together." Terry took Death's arm and followed him through the doors and onto the black desert under the endless night. The end. The character of Death in Good Omens, while not technically the character of Death in Discworld, was going to be incredibly important to the fan base with the loss of Terry Pratchett still fresh in their mind. This was going to be the kind death Terry had written about for nearly 30-odd years. So, with audiences' expectations thoroughly raised, who do we have to play this character? It's Brian Cox, the bad guy from X2.
I was piloting Black Ops missions in the jungles of North Vietnam where you were sucking on your mama's tit at Woodstock, Kelly.
Gross. Now, before I start complaining about Cox's performance too much, I do want to say, on paper, Brian Cox is an okay choice. I definitely think he had the capability to play the part of Death, but his performance is just so uninspiring.
Finally!
What does it mean, sir?
It's a call to action. War and famine. Pollution and death.
You can just tell he's reading a script in a booth somewhere and waiting to get a check at the end of the day. To venture into pun territory, Cox's version of Death is, well, lifeless. This is only exacerbated when you see just how hard these other actors are trying. I mean, this is a woman who was pretending to be another woman who was being possessed by a ghost and then a disembodied angel.
Acting talent!
The character of Death even has one of the most iconic lines in the book, and Cox really half-asses it.
Now don't think of it as dying. Think of it as leaving early to avoid the rush.
Brian, can you try that again? Like you actually care about your job? Now, before I move on, I do have one final complaint with the series, and this is probably where I'm going to lose a lot of you, and I just want to remind you of what I said at the beginning of the video.
Good Omens is the best book adaptation ever put to film.
My final complaint is that Neil Gaiman isn't very funny.
Shut your stupid mouth and die already.
Now, before you come at me with your virtual pitchforks, I want to say that Neil Gaiman is one of my absolute favorite authors, and his work is utterly amazing. American Gods is to this day my all-time favorite novel. The man does not miss when it comes to writing, and when he tries his hardest, he can even write some humorous things. Neverwhere is an entire book that is not only a wonderful book, but the humorous observations in it will still make me smile years later. There are jokes from the Good Omens novel that make it to screen, but without the correct understanding of what makes a joke work in a visual medium like television, it's just going to come off as either too dry, tonally off, or just strange. Take this scene, for instance, with Hastur and the ambassador's son.
What are they telling you?
The voices.
Yes.
In my head, all say,
What?
you smell like poo.
Will someone take this kid away from me, please? Now, I will admit that a lot of Crowley and Aziraphale scenes are hilarious, but that's really because of David Tennant's and Michael Sheen's performances, not so much the writing.
Of course, no. Yeah, excuse me, Mom. We're two supernatural entities just looking for the notorious son of Satan. Wonder if you might help us with our inquiries.
Good TV comedy is more than two actors playing off one another. You have to incorporate blocking, music, sound drops, not to mention factoring in tone for your jokes. This does not match the tone of the poop joke you just made, sir. When it comes to TV comedy, you can't just write a joke, you have to add the strengths of the medium of TV to it. Otherwise, comedy shows would just be actors reading out jokes off of a page. Going back to the beginning a bit here, the writing duo of Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman work a lot like the two leads of the series. Pratchett was always the funny man to Neil Gaiman's straight man. So much so that the publisher of Good Omens even made this the author photo for the back covers of the early printings of the book. Since Pratchett sadly passed away, however, you can really sense the loss of a top-tier funny man in the final product. There's an ingredient missing here, and it's notable. Which is not to say that the final product isn't good, it's wonderful. The heartfelt moments in this show are in a lot of ways even more gut-wrenching and loving on screen than they were in the book.
I suppose I should get him to drop me off at the bookshop.
It burned down, remember? You can stay at my place, if you like.
I don't think my side would like that.
You don't have a side anymore. Neither of us do.
One of Gaiman's strengths, however, is his ability to make you fall in love with these characters, and that's really what this series is all about. Love. As I pointed out earlier, the book Good Omens became a cult classic over the years, so much so that when Gaiman and Pratchett would go on tour with a new book, people would still bring them their battered copies of Good Omens for them to sign, a point of pride for both authors. And it's because of this cult following, Amazon even agreed to produce the show at all. But when people love a book this much, it can sometimes create an almost impossible level of expectation for the show. Gaiman even addresses this in a Tumblr post. Your headcanon is your headcanon. The characters in your mind are what they are, and nobody is trying to take them away from you. Think of the Good Omens TV show as a stage play. For 6 full hours, actors are going to be portraying the roles of Crowley and Aziraphale, Shadwell and Madame Tracy, Newt and Anathema, Adam, Pepper, Wensleydale, and Brian, and the rest. Will they look like the people in your head? The ones you've been drawing and writing about and imagining for, in some cases, almost 30 years? Probably not, which is fine. The people in your head and your drawings are still there, and still real, and still true. With the amount of weirdness that is Good Omens, it was a crazy risk for Amazon to invest as much money as they did into it, and it only succeeds as a series because of the sheer amount of love every single person working on this show put into it. I mean, the budgets were stretched so thin for the show, Nick Offerman agreed to play the part of the ambassador for practically nothing. He wanted to be in the show that badly. Critical reception of the show was met with an average, if not favorable, response with an honorable 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, but the real measure of the show's success can be seen in its fan base. Try going to any kind of comic book or fantasy sci-fi convention in 2019, and you'd find dozens, if not hundreds, of Crowley and Aziraphale cosplayers in attendance. The fan art section of Tumblr practically exploded with the different depictions of Crowley and Aziraphale, a good portion of which being extremely wholesome, most of the time. But the biggest community response is from the LGBT+ community, and with the people who are non-binary. The character of Pollution is specifically changed from the book to be non-binary, and another group that finds representation in Good Omens is the asexual community. Aaron Hart has a great article on Medium explaining this, which I'll link to in the description. It's a profoundly queer relationship, not just because the two are male presenting, but because their relationship involves no physical intimacy. At first glance, this may seem less like valuable queer representation and more like a cop-out, a way to ensure plausible deniability about the relationship, but this ignores a segment of the LGBT+ community, one that has long had to scrounge for crumbs of representation, the asexual community. In recent years, LGBT+ representation in media has grown massively, yet canonically asexual characters remain few and far between. And if an ace character is in a relationship, it's usually with a non-ace, and they have to make compromises for the sake of the relationship. Enter Good Omens. It is obvious that Aziraphale and Crowley love each other. They bicker like an old married couple, and despite Aziraphale's insistence that he doesn't even like Crowley, he frequently looks at his friend with tenderness in his eyes. They never kiss, they never declare I love you, and show no interest in sex with anyone. But they don't need to. In response to a tweet telling him to help normalize gay and queer labels, or at least acknowledge Aziraphale and Crowley are gay, bi, pan, Neil Gaiman said, I wouldn't exclude the ideas that they are ace, aromantic, or trans. They are an angel and a demon, not male humans. Whatever Crowley and Aziraphale are, it's a love story. Which leads me to my main point. The entirety of Good Omens, book and show, was created with love by practically everyone involved, and received by the audience the same way. I mean, I honestly doubt I told any of the hardcore fans something they didn't already know. Neil Gaiman made this series as a love letter to his friend, and if you look at how common and damaging things like studio influences or showrunners giving up, it's a miracle it came out as well as it did. Sadly, Gaiman and Pratchett never did get around to writing Good Omens 2, even though they said they plotted out the entire book one night in a hotel room during a convention. Gaiman himself has said he's retired from showrunning and wants to get back to writing novels, with the occasional break to help out with Netflix's upcoming Sandman adaptation. This series is very much a self-contained story. We aren't going to get any more of it. So I think as fans, we should all sit back, relax, and appreciate the world that is Good Omens together.
To the world. To the world.
Hey everyone, if you've made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks for watching. This video turned out to be way longer than I thought it would be. If you like what I do, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button, it really helps out the channel. Or consider becoming a patron by clicking on the link down below for my Patreon. Thanks for watching.